So a few months ago, I was talking with a friend. He's a financial analyst, the type, prides himself on being super rational, really cold logic.
Uh-huh. The numbers guy.
Exactly. And we were discussing, the risk of a potential market bubble happening. And he was just dismissive, completely.
Oh, really? Despite the chatter.
Yeah. He told me, look, I've analyzed the data. I've read all the opposing reports. And basically, he concluded the media was just being hysterical.
Yeah.
His confidence was, it was unshakable.
Right. I see the facts, that kind of thing.
Totally. He literally leaned back in his chair and said, I see the facts. And the facts just don't support the panic. He was so calm, so collected. Honestly, it was reassuring at the time.
I can imagine. Confidence can be contagious.
But then something interesting happened. Later that same week, I happened to notice his desk, and scattered everywhere were copies of the same two economic newsletters, both known for being, extremely optimistic.
Ah, okay. Not exactly a balanced diet of information, then.
Not at all. And get this. Underneath his monitor, tucked right into the frame, was this little photocopied quote. It said, "Pessimism sounds smart. Optimism makes money."
Wow. Okay, so the rational analysis maybe had a little help.
That's when it just clicked for me. He hadn't just reached an objective conclusion. He kind of curated one.
He built his case rather than found it.
Exactly. He wasn't ignoring the contradictory facts because he was being coldly rational, but because, he was caught in his own sort of invisible editing process.
Yeah.
That confidence I found so reassuring. It wasn't because he was seeing the reality. It was because he was aggressively reinforcing a reality, his preferred reality.
He was searching for proof, not truth.
You got it. The whole time, he thought he was seeking truth, but his brain was just scanning for proof. And once you really grasp that little difference, you start seeing it everywhere. You realize your brain is constantly, lying to you.
Lying might sound harsh, but it's filtering, editing.
Right, maybe editing is better. It's not to deceive you maliciously. It's more like trying to protect you, maybe. Simplify things.
Precisely. And knowing how it edits, how it filters, that's the key, isn't it? That's the tool you need to actually start seeing the world a bit more as it is, not just how your mind wants it to be.
Yeah, definitely.
That is the perfect setup because it captures the absolute core of what we're diving into today. That gap between seeking objective truth and just seeking proof for what we already believe or want to believe.
So welcome everyone to this deep dive.
Our mission today really is to unpack these mental shortcuts, these cognitive biases. Think of them as the invisible operating system running in the background, constantly filtering everything you perceive.
And it's not just abstract psychology, is it? We're looking at how this stuff concretely impacts, everything.
Everything. We're going to explore their powerful, often unseen influence across three really big areas. First, how they shape commerce, consumer choices, basically how and why you buy things. Second, how they create these huge, sometimes catastrophic blind spots in corporate leadership. Strategy decisions worth billions.
Right, the big mistakes.
And third, maybe the most urgent area right now, why these human biases pose this massive ethical challenge for the future of artificial intelligence.
Wow, okay, so it connects all the way from an Instagram ad to the future of AI ethics.
It really does. We're looking at these biases not just as, interesting psychological quirks you read about. They are defining forces. They shape our economic reality, our social structures.
So these cognitive biases, they're essentially mental filters, right? That's the basic idea.
That's a great way to put it. Mental filters. They dramatically cut down the sheer amount of brain power needed to navigate what is, frankly, a chaotic world.
Yeah, which sounds good.
Right.
Efficient.
Yeah, sounds useful. Less thinking.
But, and this is the crucial but, in simplifying things, they fundamentally shape our decisions, our relationships, our whole worldview.
Yeah.
And the kicker is, it often happens completely beneath our conscious awareness. So you're saying my identity, maybe my political leanings, even what I decide to buy online, it's often just the end result of a story my brain has been telling itself for years, unconsciously.
To a large extent, yes. It's a curated narrative, unconsciously rehearsed. But look, before we get into all the specific examples, the marketing tricks, the boardroom blunders, the AI dangers, we kind of need to touch on this core tension, this underlying debate in the field.
Right. The big question, are these biases just flaws, mistakes in our thinking, or are they actually useful sometimes, like adaptive strategies?
Exactly that debate. For a long, long time, the dominant view came from the brilliant work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They basically founded the whole heuristics and biases field.
The thinking fast and slow guys.
The very same. Their work defined these shortcuts as systematic deviations from pure rational choice. They lead to predictable, often less than optimal outcomes. So for Kahneman and Tversky, biases really highlight the flaws in our thinking. They're errors baked into the human system.
Okay, so they're bugs in the software.
That was the prevailing idea. Their research gave us the whole vocabulary to even talk about these mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But it begs a question, doesn't it? If these mental mechanisms are so fundamentally flawed, why are they still around? Why haven't millennia of evolution ironed them out?
Good point. If they just caused errors, you'd think they'd disappear.
That's exactly the question Gerd Gigerenzer started asking. He pushed back quite hard. He argues that many things we label as biases might actually be highly functional, context-specific, adaptive strategies. He calls them fast and frugal heuristics.
Fast and frugal, meaning quick and efficient.
Quick, efficient, and surprisingly effective. They're simple rules of thumb that often perform remarkably well in the real world, especially when you don't have much time or the information you have is incomplete or uncertain, which is, well, most real-world situations.
Okay, can you give an example of one of these fast and frugal things?
Sure. Take something super simple called the recognition heuristic. Imagine I ask you to guess which of two cities has a larger population. Say, Dortmund or Bielefeld.
Okay, I've definitely heard of Dortmund.
Yeah.
Bielefeld. Less so. So I'd guess Dortmund is bigger.
Right. You use the recognition heuristic. If you recognize the name of one but not the other, you infer that the recognized one is likely more significant, probably bigger. Gigerenzer did experiments on this.
And did it work?
Often, yes, especially in environments with incomplete knowledge like guessing city sizes or stock performance. This simple heuristic frequently outperformed complex statistical models that tried to weigh lots of factors. It's adaptive. Recognition often correlates with importance or size in the real world.
Huh. So it's a shortcut that actually gets you to the right answer. Or close enough a lot of the time with less effort.
Precisely. So the picture gets more nuanced. We're not just hunting for mistakes that hurt us. We're looking at survival mechanisms, mental tools that evolved for a certain kind of world. A world perhaps simpler, faster, more uncertain than the one demanding complex calculations today, especially for things like global finance or designing AI.
So the problem isn't necessarily the shortcut itself, but maybe using a fast and frugal tool when what you really need is that slow, careful, deliberative analysis, using the wrong tool for the job.
That's the crux of it. Understanding when a heuristic is helpful and when it becomes a bias, a hindrance. You have to grasp the fundamental mechanism before you can really analyze why a corporation failed or why you clicked buy now.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's get into those fundamentals then. Section 1, the echo chamber and the first impression. Defining some of these core biases that act as our internal editor.
Right. So foundationally, as we said, our brains didn't evolve primarily to find objective truth. They evolved to optimize for speed, efficiency, survival. We see the world less as it is and more as it's useful for us to see it right now to help us act.
And the bias that seems most directly related to my friend the analyst, the one that really shapes how we take in information, is confirmation bias. The echo chamber of the mind, you called it.
Yes, confirmation bias. It's the active tendency, and active is the key word, to seek out, interpret, and strongly favor information that confirms what you already believe. At the same time, you unconsciously ignore, dismiss, or actively argue against evidence that contradicts your beliefs.
It's like the brain's mandate shifts from find out what's true to find proof that I'm already right.
That's a perfect summary. And what makes it so powerful, so sticky, is the neurological reinforcement. It's not just a philosophical preference for being right. There's a biochemical element.
Ah, right. You mentioned this earlier, the dopamine connection.
Absolutely. Neuroimaging studies show that when you encounter information that aligns with your pre-existing beliefs, your brain's reward system, specifically an area called the nucleus accumbens, releases a little bit of dopamine.
The pleasure chemical.
Exactly. It literally feels good, biochemically rewarding, to have your beliefs validated. Conversely, when you run into information that challenges your views, it often triggers activity in brain areas associated with threat, conflict, or discomfort, like the amygdala or insula.
So thinking critically, actually engaging with stuff that might prove you wrong, feels neurologically harder, maybe even a bit threatening, and definitely less rewarding in the immediate moment.
That's the biological hurdle. Meanwhile, digging through those optimistic newsletters like your friend did, that probably gave him little pleasant dopamine hits all along the way. It makes gravitating towards comfortable information sources incredibly natural.
It explains so much about the current media landscape, political polarization, people curating their feeds to only see things they agree with.
It's a huge factor. Why do people get into furious arguments online? Partly, it's the dopamine hits they get every time they feel they've won a point or reinforced their own side's narrative within their echo chamber.
Okay, so that's about seeking proof. What about estimating risk? How do biases play in there? Let's talk about the availability heuristic, the bias of what's easy to recall.
Right, the availability heuristic. This is our tendency to rely heavily on information that comes to mind quickly and easily, information that is mentally available when we're trying to judge the likelihood or frequency of something happening. We essentially substitute how easily we can remember examples for actual statistical probability.
The classic example always mentioned is the fear of flying versus driving.
Right, the textbook case, yeah. Statistically, driving is far, far riskier per mile traveled. But car accidents are usually localized, common, and don't dominate headlines unless they're particularly horrific. A plane crash, however, extremely rare, but when it happens, it's a single, massive, visually dramatic event. It gets saturation media coverage.
So that vivid memory of a plane crash is super available in your mind.
Exactly. It comes to mind instantly. And because it's so easily recalled, your brain overestimates the actual risk of flying based purely on the memorability of the disaster, not the cold, hard flight safety statistics.
I saw this recently with a colleague. She lives in a big city, and there was this widely reported incident on the subway. Nobody was seriously hurt, but it got a lot of press. She became terrified of taking the subway.
Okay.
But she rides her bicycle to work every single day through heavy city traffic. Totally comfortable. Even though statistically, cycling in that environment carries a much higher daily risk of injury than the subway.
That's a perfect illustration. The subway incident, because it was publicized and dramatic, became highly available mentally. Her perception of risk shifted based on that availability, overriding the statistical reality of her daily commute.
We see this with insurance too, right?
Wow.
Like after a big natural disaster.
Oh, absolutely. After a major flood gets heavy media coverage, even in areas that historically aren't high risk, there's a huge spike in people buying flood insurance. The awareness of the risk makes it mentally available, driving immediate action, even if the actual statistical probability of another flood in their specific area hasn't fundamentally changed.
Okay, so availability guides our gut feeling about risk based on memory. But there's another bias that messes with our sense of value from the very first moment. Anchoring bias.
Anchoring. This is our tendency to over-rely on the very first piece of information we encounter, the anchor, when making judgments. That initial piece of information, even if it's arbitrary, heavily skews all subsequent thinking about the topic.
How does that work? Why does the first number stick so much?
It's partly because our brains are looking for a starting point, a reference. Absolute value is often really hard to determine, right? Is this house really worth $800,000? Who knows? So we grab onto the first plausible number we see and judge everything else relative to that. It simplifies a complex judgment.
So I'm house hunting, and the very first place I look at is listed for, say, $1 million, even if it's overpriced or needs tons of work. That $1 million becomes my mental anchor. Then, when I see a much nicer house listed for $800,000, my brain immediately thinks, wow, that's cheap, or that's a good deal. Even if, objectively, maybe both houses are only worth $600,000 on the open market.
You got it. The anchor forces you to evaluate the difference between the anchor and the new price, rather than assessing the absolute objective value of the second house independently.
And this effect is strong.
Incredibly robust. Tversky and Kahneman did these classic experiments where they'd spin a wheel of fortune with numbers from 0 to 100 in front of people. Then they'd ask a totally unrelated question, like, what percentage of African nations are members of the UN?
Okay, see, it was random.
It was random, but people whose wheel landed on a high number, say 65, consistently gave much higher estimates for the UN question than people whose wheel landed on a low number, like 10. The completely arbitrary number from the wheel served as an anchor that dragged their estimates up or down.
Wow. Even when the anchor is obviously irrelevant. That's powerful.
It shows how deeply ingrained this mechanism is. The power of that first piece of information is immense.
And this leads us perfectly into our next section, doesn't it? Because if anchors are that powerful, you can bet someone's using them deliberately. Section 2. How these biases get weaponized, basically, in the marketplace, the price tag illusion.
Exactly. We're moving now from understanding the basic psychology to seeing how it's actively applied for persuasion. Marketing professionals, especially in the digital age, are incredibly adept at triggering anchoring and confirmation biases. They aren't just waiting for you to stumble upon an anchor. They are strategically deploying anchors to shape your perception of value and push you towards a purchase.
You see this everywhere online, especially on visual platforms like Instagram or any e-commerce store. The most obvious one is that price framing tactic, right? The crossed-out price.
The classic reference pricing, displaying a significantly higher crossed-out original or list price right next to the current lower sale price. It's pure anchoring 101.
How does it work so well?
The crossed-out price becomes the high anchor. It establishes a perception of the item's initial value in your mind. Your brain then automatically compares the new lower price against that high anchor. The perceived difference creates this powerful psychological feeling of getting a deal, of saving money, of winning.
Even if the sale price is still, maybe higher than a competitor's regular price.
Often, yes. The feeling of the discount relative to the anchor can overpower objective value comparison. That reference point frames the entire decision.
They also use low anchors too, don't they? Like starting from...
Absolutely. Phrases like plans starting from $10 a month or items starting from $5. This sets a deliberately low anchor, a low reference point. It makes everything else seem more affordable in comparison. Even if the features you actually want push the price way up, that initial low anchor makes the entry feel less daunting and makes subsequent price points seem like smaller, more manageable jumps.
It manages your expectations downwards.
Precisely. And then you layer on the urgency and scarcity cues. The limited stock banners, the sale ends today countdown timers.
FOMO, fear of missing out.
Exactly. While FOMO isn't a core cognitive bias itself in the same way, it acts like a psychological accelerant. It pushes you out of that slow, careful, analytical thinking, what Kahneman called System 2, and forces you into the fast, intuitive, shortcut mode, System 1. It speeds up the decision, urging you to buy now before you have time to rationally evaluate if the deal is actually good or if you even need the item.
What's really fascinating, though, is seeing evidence of how well these tactics work, even on people who you'd think would be more skeptical. People who are trained to see through persuasive language.
Right. There was this interesting study conducted with university students over at Universitas Negeri Medan. These weren't just average consumers. They were students likely getting training in rhetoric, communication, maybe even linguistics. They should be more critically aware of persuasive techniques.
So the question was, does knowing the tricks make you immune?
That was the hypothesis being tested. And the results? Well, they suggest awareness doesn't equal immunity at all.
What do they find?
A huge majority, 80%, 80 of these educated students reported they were more likely to actually purchase something after seeing these kinds of Instagram ads using anchoring and scarcity.
80%. Even knowing about rhetoric.
Yep. And here's the really telling part. When they asked which specific technique was the most compelling, the most persuasive, an overwhelming 90% pointed to the price discount. The anchoring effect.
90% said it was the price. Wow. So all the limited time stuff was secondary.
Far secondary. All the other tactics combined scarcity, urgency, time limits only accounted for about 10% of what students found most persuasive. For this educated group, the pure cognitive pull of that perceived financial saving driven by the price anchor was overwhelmingly dominant. Price anchoring was king.
Can we look at the specific ads they saw, what kind of anchors were used?
Yeah, they analyzed a couple. One was a McDonald's ad for a Ramadan package. It showed the original price, RP 260,181. That's the high anchor. Then prominently crossed out with the new discounted price of RP 195,455 right next to it.
Big difference. Makes the new price look great.
Exactly. And they threw in a bonus for free McFlurries, but the primary psychological heavy lifting is done by that stark price comparison generated by the anchor.
Okay, what about the other?
The other was an ad from Shopee, the e-commerce platform. It used a more sophisticated dual anchor strategy. It screamed up to 80% discount. That's a massive high discount anchor, creating a huge potential savings frame.
Right, big number.
But then it combined that with starting from 20 RB, 20,000 rupiah, that sets a really low-cost anchor simultaneously. So they're hitting you from both ends. Huge potential savings and a super low barrier to entry. It frames the whole shopping event as almost irresistibly affordable.
That's clever. High anchor for savings, low anchor for starting costs.
Very clever. It confirms that marketers are definitely playing a strategic game here. And this is where it gets really interesting. The study also found that the students weren't actually naive. They weren't completely fooled.
What do you mean? They knew it was hype?
Pretty much. A significant majority, 70% of these students, explicitly said they believed the ads exaggerated their claims. They were skeptical. They sensed the hype.
But they still said they were likely to buy, and that the price discount was the main driver.
Exactly. That's the fascinating cognitive disconnect. They knew, rationally, that the claims were probably inflated. Yet the powerful, visceral pull of the price anchor, that feeling of getting a deal, still made them highly likely to purchase. Their rational skepticism was basically overridden by the immediate psychological reward offered by the anchor.
So the takeaway for us as consumers is, knowing the trick doesn't necessarily save you. Your rational brain might see the exaggeration, but the bias still pulls you in.
It seems that way. The cognitive pull of a perceived bargain is incredibly strong, perhaps bypassing some of our rational filters. You might need active countermeasures, not just passive awareness.
And what's the lesson for the marketers using these techniques?
Well, it suggests price anchoring is extremely potent, especially with younger, educated audiences. But maybe relying too heavily on those cliched scarcity tactics, only 3 left, when your audience already thinks you're exaggerating, might actually backfire and damage credibility over the long run. The real pull seems to be the perceived value transfer, the deal itself, not necessarily the artificial deadline.
Okay, this strategic use of bias in quick, maybe low-stakes consumer decisions. It sets the stage for thinking about much bigger decisions, right? Where the stakes are way higher. That takes us into section 3, the boardroom's blind spot, biases in leadership.
Exactly. When a cognitive bias influences whether a student buys a discounted burger, the consequences are pretty small. But when the same kinds of biases influence a CEO or a board making a multi-billion-dollar strategic decision, the fallout can be catastrophic, systemic failure even.
Where should we start? What are the common traps leaders fall into? Overconfidence seems like a big one.
Overconfidence bias is absolutely critical in leadership. It's the tendency for leaders, especially successful ones, to overestimate their own abilities, the accuracy of their knowledge, and their forecasts for the future. This often leads them to pursue overly ambitious strategies and, crucially, to overlook or downplay significant risks. Past success can be intoxicating.
It breeds a sense of invincibility.
It can. Look at Deutsche Bank's massive global expansion drive back in the early 2000s. They'd been incredibly successful in their home market, Germany. That success seemed to convince the leadership they could replicate that model anywhere, under any conditions.
They overestimated their ability to succeed internationally.
Massively. They underestimated the huge complexities and volatility of the global investment banking scene compared to their more stable domestic market. That overconfidence, born from past success, led to strategic overreach, taking on way too much risk without proper hedging.
And we know how that ended in 2008.
Precisely. Huge write-downs, government intervention, years of painful restructuring. Success, when it's not tempered with a healthy dose of humility, can fuel a really dangerous, blinding overconfidence.
And I imagine that overconfidence then feeds right back into confirmation bias, doesn't it? Creating this echo chamber at the very top.
It absolutely turbocharges it. It creates this toxic pairing where leaders are already overly sure of themselves, and then they actively filter information to support their chosen path, rejecting anything that contradicts it as just noise or negativity.
Is there a big corporate example of that?
The Volkswagen emissions scandal, Dieselgate, is almost a textbook case. VW leadership was deeply, almost religiously, committed to a strategy of becoming the world's biggest automaker, and clean diesel technology was the cornerstone of that strategy, especially for the U.S. market.
Okay.
But engineers started bringing forward evidence, data showing that the diesel engine simply could not meet the strict U.S. emissions standards legitimately. These were clear warnings directly challenging the core strategic pillar.
And the leadership
Systematically ignored, suppressed, or explained away the warnings. The information flew in the face of their grand strategic vision and their confidence in it. They filtered out the inconvenient data.
So they weren't just lying to regulators initially, they were kind of lying to themselves first, letting confirmation bias protect a strategy that was technically impossible.
It appears that way. They focused only on information that supported the existing strategy and the goal of global dominance. Contradictory evidence wasn't treated as a vital warning, but as an obstacle to be overcome or ignored. This deep-seated denial, fueled by overconfidence and confirmation bias, led directly to the decision to install those illegal defeat devices. The rest is history. Billions in fines, jail time, massive reputational damage.
Wow. Okay, so overconfidence and confirmation bias are a dangerous mix. What about that other bias, the Dunning-Kruger effect? How does that play out in the boardroom? The confidence illusion, you called it.
Dunning-Kruger. It's such a fascinating and damaging paradox in leadership. It describes how people with limited competence or knowledge in a specific area often vastly overestimate their ability. They literally don't know enough to know how much they don't know.
While the real experts.
While the people who are genuinely highly competent and knowledgeable are often acutely aware of the vastness of the subject, the nuances, the uncertainties. So they tend to underestimate their relative competence, or at least express their knowledge with more caution and caveats.
So in a meeting, the person who knows the least might sound the most confident and certain, while the person who actually knows the most might sound hesitant or unsure.
Exactly. And you can see how devastating that disparity can be at the leadership level. Boards of directors, senior teams, they might get swayed by the confident-sounding but incompetent leader while dismissing the cautious, nuanced warnings of the true expert. It makes filtering advice incredibly difficult.
It sounds like it could create this self-reinforcing cycle of bad decisions. The overconfident leader hires people who agree with him.
Precisely. If a senior leader is suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, blissfully unaware of their own incompetence, they often surround themselves with people who affirm their confidence, who don't challenge them. This builds a powerful confirmation bias bubble around the leader's potentially flawed vision. That lack of self-awareness at the top blocks critical feedback and leads to poor, sometimes disastrous, decisions.
It feels like a trap. If overconfidence is so dangerous, but you need confidence to lead effectively, what's the antidote? Is it just being doubtful all the time? That doesn't seem right either.
No, constant doubt leads to paralysis. The antidote isn't doubt. It's something much more nuanced and powerful. It's what some researchers call confident humility.
Confident humility, what does that mean exactly?
It means being secure enough in your core strengths, your expertise, your ability to lead, that you also have the humility to admit what you don't know, to acknowledge your weaknesses, uncertainties, and, crucially, to actively seek out and listen to contradictory evidence and dissenting opinions.
Okay, so it's a balance. Not arrogance, not timidity.
Exactly. Confidence without humility breeds that blind arrogance we saw with Deutsche Bank or VW. Humility without confidence leads to that debilitating self-doubt that prevents any bold action. Confident humility is the sweet spot. It allows a leader to say, I believe we can achieve this goal, while also saying, but I'm not entirely sure this current strategy is the right way to get there. What are we missing? How could this go wrong?
I want to push on that a little. In a really high-pressure business environment dealing with investors, competitors, isn't there a huge risk that showing that kind of humility just gets perceived as weakness, as indecisiveness? Saying, I don't know, sounds nice, but doesn't it just kill momentum?
That's a really important point and a common misconception. Confident humility isn't about expressing wishy-washy uncertainty about the goal or the team's capability. It's about being honest about the uncertainty of the path or the specific solution. The key is shifting the basis of confidence.
Shifting it from what to what?
From confidence in having the answer to confidence in the team's collective ability to find the answer. The leader projects unwavering belief in the team's resourcefulness, intelligence, and resilience, even while admitting they don't personally have the perfect plan sketched out yet.
Can you give an example of that in action?
I think NBA Commissioner Adam Silver's handling of the 2020 pandemic shutdown is a fantastic example. The league was facing an unprecedented crisis. Everything shut down. Nobody knew how or when they could play again.
Total uncertainty.
Total uncertainty. Silver didn't pretend to have all the answers. He famously told his team, essentially, look, I don't know exactly how we're going to get games running again safely, but I have absolute confidence in our collective ability to figure it out.
Ah, okay. So he admitted ignorance about the how, but projected total confidence in the who, the team.
Precisely. That framing, I don't know the answer, but I know we can find it, creates enormous psychological safety. It empowers people to experiment, to voice doubts about initial ideas, to pivot quickly when something isn't working without fearing blame. It unleashed the creativity that led to the innovative and ultimately successful NBA bubble concept.
That makes sense. It fosters a learning environment, not just a performance one.
That's the core of it. Operationalizing confident humility means deliberately cultivating a learning culture. You have to shift the rewards. Don't just reward successful outcomes, reward smart experiments, reward people who test new approaches, even if they fail, as long as they learn from it. Behavioral studies are clear. Learning cultures innovate more effectively and avoid those huge catastrophic mistakes far better than purely performance-driven ones.
Okay, so culture change is one thing. What can individual leaders do?
Concrete steps. First, leaders need to actively give themselves the benefit of the doubt. What I mean is, schedule time for intellectual humility. Force yourself to question your assumptions. Ask yourself, what do I really know about this? What am I taking for granted? Getting back into that beginner's mindset periodically is crucial for generating new insights. Believing you're already an expert is the fastest way to stop learning.
So challenge your own certainty.
Yes. And related to that, actively seek out disagreement. Before making any major strategic decision, make it a standard practice to identify at least one strong conflicting piece of information or opinion. Research shows that just the act of considering one reason why you might be wrong can significantly curb overconfidence bias.
So force yourself to look at the other side.
And institutionalize asking tough questions. Make it normal, expected, even required to ask. How do we know this is true? What evidence contradicts this? And maybe the most powerful one, what single development or piece of information would prove our entire strategy wrong? Asking that focuses the mind on critical vulnerabilities.
Those are really good practical checks against that internal editor's just reinforcing itself. But speaking of persisting with things even when maybe you shouldn't, there are other common traps in corporations, right? Like throwing good money after bad.
Ah, yes. The sunk cost fallacy. This is perhaps one of the most emotionally potent biases in the corporate world and in life generally.
Explain that one again.
It's our tendency to continue investing resources, time, money, effort, reputation into a project or endeavor that is clearly failing simply because we've already invested so much. Rationally, the past investment is gone, it's sunk. The only thing that should matter is the future potential costs and benefits. But emotionally, it's incredibly hard to walk away and admit that all that past effort was wasted.
You see this all the time with big, long-running projects, especially government ones. They just keep going, no matter how much they overrun.
Exactly. The Stuttgart 21 railway project in Germany is a classic example. A massive, complex infrastructure project that's faced decades of delays, huge cost escalations, significant environmental opposition, technical problems. Yet it persists. Why? Partly because the sheer amount of political capital, financial resources, and time already sunk into it makes the idea of abandoning it seem politically and emotionally impossible, regardless of the current rational arguments against it.
It feels like admitting a colossal failure.
And here's where neuroeconomics gives us a really unsettling insight. Brain imaging studies have actually shown that the prospect of realizing a loss on a previous investment, acknowledging a sunk cost, activates brain regions associated with experiencing physical pain.
Wow, so cutting your losses literally feels painful to the brain.
It seems so. The brain registers abandoning that failing project almost like suffering a physical injury. This creates a powerful, almost biological drive to keep pouring resources in, to avoid crystallizing that painful loss, even when all the financial and logistical logic says stop.
That completely reframes it. It's not just a thinking error, it's active pain avoidance. So how do organizations fight that?
It requires strict discipline and foresight. The best defense is to establish clear, objective, non-negotiable exit criteria for major projects right at the very beginning, before the emotional investment and sunk costs pile up. What specific metrics or conditions will trigger a mandatory reevaluation or termination?
Decide how you'll pull the plug before you even start.
Essentially, yes. And then, critically, you need regular formal reviews that assess ongoing projects based only on current market conditions, future projections, and remaining costs to completion, deliberately ignoring the resources already spent. Sometimes having the decision made by executives who are not involved in the project's initiation can help, as they have less emotional baggage tied to the past investment.
Okay, one more boardroom bias that seems crucial. The danger of everyone just agreeing too easily. Groupthink.
Groupthink is the silent killer of critical analysis in decision-making teams. It's that mode of thinking where the desire for harmony, consensus, and interpersonal cohesion within the group becomes more important than realistically appraising alternative courses of action or pointing out flaws in the preferred plan.
Nobody wants to be the skunk at the garden party.
Exactly. Dissent is discouraged, implicitly or explicitly. Doubts are suppressed. Contradictory information is rationalized away. We saw this play out tragically in the lead up to the failure of Northern Rock, the British bank.
What happened?
Their leadership team pursued an increasingly aggressive and risky mortgage lending strategy. The internal culture apparently prized consensus, confidence, and loyalty. This meant that warning signs about the housing market and the risks in their funding model were either not raised, or if they were quickly shut down or ignored because they clashed with the prevailing optimistic mood and the desire for group harmony.
So they had this internal echo chamber built on shared confidence and a reluctance to challenge each other.
It appears so. It led to a catastrophic lack of critical risk assessment. The groupthink bubble blinded them to the mounting dangers, ultimately leading to a run on the bank and its nationalization during the 2008 financial crisis.
Now, just looping back quickly to that Kahneman versus Genscher debate we started with.
Yeah.
Even with these really damaging corporate biases like sunk cost or groupthink, is there still an argument that sometimes in certain contexts, maybe even confirmation bias could be adaptive?
It's a really important point to consider. Genscher would caution us against what he called the bias, the automatic assumption that every heuristic or shortcut is inherently an error. Take confirmation bias. Imagine a company operating in a very stable market with a well-established strategy that has consistently delivered good results for years.
Okay, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. In that specific context, could confirmation bias, the tendency to stick with the proven strategy and maybe filter out minor contradictory signals, actually be adaptive? Could it help maintain operational efficiency and avoid the significant costs and organizational disruption involved in constantly questioning and potentially changing a strategy that's working perfectly well?
I see the point. Constantly chasing novelty isn't always smart either.
Yeah.
Maybe sticking with what works, even if it involves ignoring some noise, is rational in a stable environment.
It could be. The environment, the context is key. A fast and frugal heuristic, like sticking with the status quo, a form of confirmation bias, might be the optimal choice when speed and stability matter and the environment isn't changing rapidly.
So it's about matching the tool to the task. Context and magnitude matter.
Exactly. For those huge, critical, strategic decisions with long-term consequences in a changing world, you absolutely need that slow, deliberative, bias-aware system 2 thinking. You need to fight the biases. But for routine, daily operational choices in a stable setting, maybe a quick heuristic is perfectly fine, even efficient.
Okay, so we have these human leaders prone to overconfidence, pain avoidance, echo chambers, essentially running flawed human algorithms. What happens when we take those flawed patterns and actually build them into real algorithms? When we outsource decisions to machines? That sounds like Section 4. The ethical frontier and the data's ghost in AI.
This transition is incredibly important and, frankly, quite sobering. We tend to think of artificial intelligence and machine learning systems as these paragons of objectivity, purely rational, free from messy human emotions and biases.
The impartial machine.
That's the image. But the reality is these systems are, in essence, relentless mirrors.
Yeah.
They don't think independently. They learn patterns from the data we feed them. And if that data reflects our own existing societal biases, the AI will absorb those biases and then amplify them, often at massive scale.
So the AI isn't biased itself, but the data it learns from is biased, so the outcome is biased.
That's the core mechanism. We need to think about 3 layers here. First, there's data bias. This is the fundamental problem. If the data used to train an AI system isn't truly representative of the population, if it's incomplete, skewed by historical discrimination, or just missing certain groups, then the AI's decisions will inevitably favor the groups that are overrepresented in the training data.
Garbage in, garbage out, basically.
Exactly, but then it gets more complex. The second layer is algorithmic bias, which is about how the algorithm itself processes that biased data. And this is where the human cognitive biases we've been discussing, like confirmation bias and the availability heuristic, actually get embedded and automated within the machine's logic.
How does confirmation bias get into an algorithm?
The infamous Amazon hiring tool experiment is the starkest example. Amazon tried to build an AI to screen resumes. They fed it about 10 years worth of their own historical hiring data resumes of people they had previously hired.
Okay, seems logical. Train it on past success.
But Because of existing systemic inequalities in the tech industry, that historical data was overwhelmingly skewed towards male candidates being hired, especially for technical roles. The algorithm was told, find the patterns that predict success. So what did it do?
It learned that being male was a predictor of success.
Precisely. It developed a powerful confirmation bias based on the data. It learned to confirm that the ideal candidate profile was male. It started actively penalizing resumes that contained words commonly found on women's resumes, like women's chess club captain. It even reportedly downgraded graduates from 2 specific all-women's colleges.
Wow. So the machine wasn't programmed with sexist intent, but it learned sexism by confirming the patterns in the biased historical data. It was seeking proof of past hiring patterns, not the truth about future potential.
That's exactly it. And the availability heuristic plays a role too. Because successful candidates in the training data were overwhelmingly white males, that profile became highly available to the algorithm. The system essentially perceived that profile as the most probable, most common, and therefore the most correct or safe choice. It systematically screened out diverse candidates simply because their profiles were less represented, less available in the historical data it learned from.
This is deeply concerning. But can developers just remove sensitive attributes like race or gender from the training data to prevent this?
That seems like the obvious fix, right? Just scrub the sensitive data. But unfortunately, it often makes the problem worse, or at least harder to detect. This gets us to the third layer: omitted variable bias.
Omitted variable bias.
Yeah. Even if you explicitly remove variables like race or gender, algorithms are incredibly good at finding proxies for those variables in the remaining data. Because of systemic inequalities, things like zip codes, certain types of purchasing history, participation in specific community groups, even vocabulary used in online posts can be highly correlated with race or gender.
So the algorithm just uses these other non-sensitive data points to figure out the sensitive attribute anyway. It still discriminates, but hides how it's doing it.
Exactly. It finds those correlations and continues to replicate the discriminatory patterns just using seemingly neutral proxies. It makes the bias much harder to identify and fix because the explicit sensitive variable isn't there.
So hiding the data isn't the answer.
What is? Paradoxically, some recent research suggests the opposite might be necessary in some cases. You might actually need to include sensitive data like race, not to enable discrimination, but specifically to allow the system to check for and actively correct potential biases in its outputs. It's called bias mitigation or fairness-aware AI development. Simply omitting the data is often a naive approach that ignores the deep-seated correlations in real-world data.
This isn't just theoretical anymore, is it? We're seeing real-world harm from biased AI.
Absolutely. In critical areas, facial recognition systems, for instance, have repeatedly shown much higher error rates when identifying faces of people with darker skin tones and women. Why?
Okay.
Largely because the massive data sets used to train them were predominantly composed of lighter-skinned male faces. The available data skewed the learning.
And healthcare, you mentioned that earlier.
The healthcare algorithm example is particularly chilling. A widely used algorithm designed to predict patients' future health needs and allocate care management resources was found to be significantly racially biased. It was trained using historical healthcare cost data as a proxy for health need. But because, historically, Black patients in the U.S. have faced systemic barriers leading to lower access to care and less lower healthcare spending, the algorithm learned that Black patients had lower costs.
So the machine equated lower historical spending with lower actual health needs.
Precisely. It systematically underestimated the health needs of Black patients compared to white patients with the same objective level of sickness, simply because their historical cost data was lower due to access barriers. It essentially baked historical inequality right into the future allocation of healthcare resources, potentially denying needed care to the sickest patients, all under the guise of objective, data-driven efficiency.
That's horrifying. It locks in past injustices and projects them forward automatically.
It's a perfect, devastating example of how historical bias becomes automated and amplified. And this raises huge ethical red flags. Obviously, there's the issue of fairness and equality bias algorithms perpetuating or even worsening inequality in crucial areas like hiring, lending, criminal justice, and healthcare.
Right. There's also the massive challenge of transparency and accountability. Many modern machine learning algorithms, especially deep learning models, operate as black boxes. It's incredibly difficult, sometimes impossible, even for the developers to understand exactly why the AI made a specific decision. So if an AI denies someone a loan or flags them for high risk, and they suspect bias, it's hard to prove or even understand the reasoning.
Extremely hard. If a human loan officer makes a biased decision, you can potentially interview them, examine their reasoning process. With a black box AI, tracing the specific pathway through millions or billions of parameters that led to a biased output is a monumental challenge. This makes auditing for bias and holding anyone accountable incredibly difficult.
And then there's the safety aspect.
Yes, safety and resilience. We need to start thinking about algorithms that embed and amplify societal biases not just as unfair, but as fundamentally malfunctioning software. They are potentially unsafe systems being deployed against populations, causing real harm. The ethical challenge isn't just about preventing bias, it's about ensuring that AI genuinely serves humanity, acting as a corrective force for our flaws, not just a high-speed amplifier of them.
The stakes are incredibly high. We can't just let human biases become the permanent, unquestionable code running our future systems. Which brings us, I think, to the crucial final section. How do we deal with this? From being used by our biases to consciously using or mitigating them. Section 5, the final shift.
Exactly. If we accept perhaps along Gigerenzer's lines that biases are, to some extent, inherent features of human cognition, maybe sometimes adaptive, sometimes not, then the goal probably isn't the unrealistic one of completely eliminating them. Instead, it shifts towards awareness, mitigation, and putting robust frameworks in place to catch these predictable flaws before they cause large-scale damage, both in ourselves and in our systems.
Okay, let's start with organizations. In the corporate world, how do we mitigate the risks of things like overconfidence, groupthink, or that painful sunk cost fallacy?
It requires a multi-pronged approach. First, targeted bias awareness training is a starting point, but it has to go beyond just defining the biases. It needs to focus on practical recognition and mitigation strategies relevant to the specific decisions people make in their roles.
Make it concrete, not just abstract theory.
Right. Second, and arguably more important, is actively promoting a culture of critical inquiry. This means institutionalizing dissent in constructive ways. Maybe it's creating formal red teams to challenge assumptions, or assigning a devil's advocate role in important meetings, or simply creating safe forums where people feel empowered to question decisions and raise concerns without fear of retribution. Diverse perspectives need to be actively sought out and valued.
Build challenge into the process.
Exactly. And specifically to combat the sunk cost fallacy, organizations need those formalized exit review protocols we talked about. Decisions to continue investing in struggling projects must be rigorously based on current data and future projections, deliberately setting aside past expenditures. Assigning the final call to an executive with less emotional investment in the project's history can also be effective.
Okay, that makes sense for human systems.
Right.
What about the AI systems? How do we stop the data's ghost from haunting the machine? What are the structural fixes needed there?
This is a huge area of ongoing research and development, but some key principles are emerging. First and foremost, we have to address the source. Use diverse and representative data sets. This isn't passive. It requires proactive effort to collect or synthetically generate data that accurately reflects the full diversity of the population the AI will impact, especially including data from historically marginalized or underrepresented groups.
Fix the input.
Fix the input as much as possible. Second, we absolutely must demand and develop greater transparency and explainability in AI systems. We need to move away from accepting black boxes for critical decisions. Techniques like S-shaped values or LIME are emerging to help developers and auditors understand which input features are driving an AI's output, making it easier to spot and diagnose bias.
So we need to be able to look under the hood.
We do. And critically, we cannot rely solely on the machine, especially in high-stakes domains. We need a human-in-the-loop approach.
Meaning humans stay involved.
Yes. It means designing systems where human judgment remains an active part of the decision-making process, working alongside the AI. This is crucial not only for oversight and accountability, but also to counteract automation bias.
Automation bias.
That's our tendency as humans to overtrust or blindly accept the output of an automated system, like an AI, simply because it came from a machine, assuming it must be correct. Having a human in the loop ensures that human judgment retains ultimate control and can question or override the AI when necessary. Accountability stays with a person.
And how do we enforce this? Make sure companies are actually doing it.
This likely requires regulation, industry standards, and internal governance. Organizations developing or deploying AI, especially in sensitive areas, must institutionalize regular ethical audits and bias impact assessments. These shouldn't be optional add-ons. They need to be standard operating procedure, conducted before deployment and periodically afterwards, to proactively identify, measure, and mitigate potential biases and harms.
Okay, so that's the big picture, corporate culture, AI development. Let's bring it right back down to the personal level now. We've spent all this time understanding these biases. Once we start recognizing these deep patterns in ourselves, how can we actually leverage that awareness? How do we turn these mental shortcuts, maybe these survival mechanisms, into tools for self-improvement?
This is really the ultimate goal, isn't it? Moving from being passively subject to the biases to becoming the active observer of them in real time. When you can see the bias operating within yourself, you gain a measure of control. You start consciously editing your own mental code.
Okay, let's take one. Confirmation bias. How do we actively flip that one?
The natural tendency is to scan for evidence that proves you're right. To leverage it, you have to consciously invert that process. Make it a deliberate habit, especially when facing an important belief or decision, to ask yourself, what single piece of evidence, what strong argument could potentially prove me wrong?
Force yourself to seek the contradiction.
Exactly. Actively search for disconfirming information. It feels uncomfortable initially. Remember that dopamine reward for confirmation, but it's the only way to expand your perspective beyond your current comfort zone and get closer to a more accurate picture of reality. It shifts the goal from seeking comfort to seeking accuracy.
Okay, what about the availability heuristic? The bias towards what's easy to recall, which often means bad news or vivid fears stick more.
Right. Since your mind tends to act based on what's most easily remembered, not necessarily what's most statistically true, you can consciously use this bias for good. You need to actively prime your brain with positive, accurate reminders.
Why do you do that?
Keep tangible reminders of your successes, your progress, your strengths readily accessible and visible. Maybe it's a wins journal you review. Maybe it's positive feedback you keep on your desk. Maybe it's setting progress reminders. By deliberately making positive achievements and data points more mentally available, you can help counteract the brain's natural negativity bias.
Negativity bias. Our tendency to focus more on the bad stuff, the threats, the mistakes, that one feels really hardwired.
It probably is. It likely evolved because, for our ancestors, missing a threat, a predator, was far more costly than missing an opportunity, some berries. Failure could mean death. So the brain became hypersensitive to potential negatives.
So we just have to fight it constantly.
Maybe not fight it directly, but redirect it. Don't try to suppress the negative detection system. Leverage its sensitivity. Use that tendency to spot potential problems for strategic risk detection. Leaders, for example, should probably think pessimistically in the planning stage, anticipating every single thing that could go wrong, every obstacle, every potential failure point. Use the negativity bias to map the minefield thoroughly, but then, crucially, they must act optimistically, using that detailed foresight not to become paralyzed by fear, but to build a confident, resilient strategy that has already anticipated and planned for those potential failures. It's the difference between being consumed by anxiety and being proactively prepared.
Think pessimistically, act optimistically. I like that.
It channels the bias productively. Look, the reality you experience, you the listener, it isn't some objective, fixed thing hitting your senses. It is actively constructed, moment by moment, by these deep patterns of attention, fueled by emotion, filtered through bias, and all rendered into a coherent story by your perception.
It's an edited reality.
It's an edited reality. And the key to making clearer, more rational, more effective decisions, whether in buying something, leading a team, or just navigating your life, is to stop just reacting to the surface story your brain presents you with. You need to start understanding and navigating the internal logic, the editing rules that constructed that story in the first place.
That feels like a really profound shift in perspective. For me, reflecting on this whole deep dive, two things really stand out as particularly powerful or surprising.
Go on.
First, just how primal and resistant that anchoring bias is, especially around price. That study showing educated students trained in rhetoric still being overwhelmingly swayed by a simple price discount, even while knowing the claims were likely exaggerated. It's stunning. It shows that knowing the trick intellectually doesn't grant immunity. You need active strategies to fight it.
The intuitive pull of a perceived bargain is incredibly strong.
Yeah. And the second big takeaway for me is the sheer scale and subtlety of the ethical danger with AI bias. How easily our own flawed human cognitive shortcuts, confirmation bias, finding patterns in skewed data, availability heuristic, overrepresenting common profiles, omitted variables, hiding discrimination, how easily these get baked into supposedly objective algorithms. And then they scale up, locking in past injustices, potentially making societal progress even harder. Yet it's a huge responsibility.
It absolutely underscores the need for radical self-awareness and ethical awareness in every context, personal, corporate, and technological.
So maybe the ultimate point is this. The moment you catch yourself, the moment you see your own bias operating while it's happening, when you realize, I'm just looking for proof here, or wait, am I scared of this just because I saw it in the news? In that moment of observation, you kind of step outside it. You become the observer, not just the observed automaton running the bias program.
That awareness is the first and most crucial step towards agency.
So if understanding your own mental shortcuts, your brain's invisible editing process, is the key to clearer thinking and better decisions, here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with this week. What's one long-held belief, maybe a strong opinion or assumption you hold, that you need to actively seek out convincing evidence against this week? Go challenge your own internal editor.